Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers clean pocket, throws the middle to Devante, touchdown, and a dagger!
What's up, YouTube? How's it going? My name's Gavin, and you guys are watching SFS, the channel with all of your fantasy football and NFL needs. Today we've got some wide receivers that we're going to be talking about here for fantasy football. I've got my top 12 guys at the position at this moment in time here. So I'm going to be breaking guys down into tiers and giving you guys a broad view of how I see things playing out as we head into the new league year. So we're not going to waste too much time today. We're going to get right into things and hit it off with our first player on the list. All right, you guys, we're here at the start of the list. I've got 4 tiers that I've broken these top 12 players into for today's video. These first 2 players are the guys at that top level tier. These are the best players at the position, and if you had to go out there and pick guys off the top of the board that I think are going to be the premier players at the wide receiver position for next season, these 2 first guys are who you want on your team. The first of these guys is Devante Adams, the number 1 wideout overall, and the star wideout for the Green Bay Packers. Devante Adams is simply, I think, the best overall wide receiver in the game right now, and his fantasy numbers absolutely reflect that. He finished as the wide receiver 1 in 2020 fantasy football while missing some time as well in there. His touchdown numbers are just off the charts. When you look at the touchdown counts for wide receivers since the year 2016, Adams is alone at the top of that list with 58 receiving touchdowns. That is just a crazy mark to be at, especially for a wide receiver. And Devante is almost at 60 touchdowns. No one else is even in the 50s since that time. So Devante, his red zone efficiency is ridiculous. This guy puts points up on the board. And for a guy who's playing for Aaron Rodgers, one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the game right now, Devante has himself a great situation in Green Bay. And when we talk about the fact that, Devante has kind of been the lone target in Green Bay, that lone alpha wide receiver that the football team has been able to get the football to, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Devante has a clear path to being the top target shareholder in that offense, and there's a real chance that the Green Bay Packers don't even address the wide receiver position in the first 2 rounds of this coming year's draft, with the other needs that have been presented and brought to the table with some roster cuts and the need to clear out cap space because of how COVID affected the salary cap for 2021. So Devante, I think, really sees no threats to his target share in 2021, and I think that he will continue his dominance here going into the later stages of his 20s. I think Devante is the top receiver in the game right now and is absolutely 100% a home run hit at the number 1 overall wide receiver position. At number 2 here, I've got Tyreek Hill. Tyreek is just a hair below Adams for me, but what puts Tyreek Hill in this top category, this top tier with Devante Adams, is that Tyreek Hill has the highest week-to-week ceiling of any wide receiver in fantasy football. When we talk about the pure track speed of Tyreek Hill and what he is able to do, not only after the catch, but just on deep balls and instant scoring situations, Tyreek does this better than anyone else in the game. When you pair that with the fact that he's got a great quarterback, the best quarterback in the game right now, Patrick Mahomes, throwing him the football, it's really no question why Tyreek Hill should be up here on this list. I think that he has a lower floor than Devante Adams. Devante scores more touchdowns. Devante sees more looks per week and has overall more targets and receptions. Tyreek Hill actually isn't a guy who really sees a crazy amount of looks per game, although he is obviously in that wide receiver 1 tier. He's the guy who really has a lot of yards per catch and shows us a great ability after the catch as well, even if he doesn't end up catching those deep passes. So Tyreek Hill, he's my wide receiver 2 right now. I think he's definitely a guy that fantasy teams should feel comfortable with drafting this season. I had a lot of question marks going into last year about whether or not he could be consistent on a week-to-week basis, but Tyreek Hill completely met my expectations, and he showed us that he can do that on a week-to-week basis. So you add that together with the ceiling, and I think Tyreek Hill is a recipe for a top 3 wide receiver this coming season again. At number 3 here, in the second tier of wideouts now, I've got Stefon Diggs at the top of the list. When you talk about Stefon Diggs and his situation in Buffalo, it was a match made in heaven. Him and Josh Allen perfectly meshed together. Diggs is great over the top. He is really, really good at running posts and post corner type routes. And he also is one of the more polished and finesse style wide receivers who is really great with his routes. This guy can do so many things with the football. We've watched Stefon Diggs actually kind of flourish in that offense into a really great stop on a dime type player, and he's thrived in those comeback and curl route situations with Josh Allen as well, which has really increased the volume that we've seen him receive since his time in Minnesota. So Stefon Diggs definitely upped his game last season, heading into his age 27 season. I think that he's right around the peak age for a wide receiver of his play style. I think Diggs is one of the more talented wideouts in the game right now, and like I talked about, Josh Allen is a dream come true quarterback situation for Diggs. He opens up his game and allows him to hit more home run balls. And especially when you look at the division, there's not that many great opponents, to be honest. I mean, Xavier Howard in that division, he's a ball hawk. Stephon Gilmore was the defensive player of the year in 2019, but he's getting older. He's regressing. I think that Diggs can still produce against him. When I look at the interdivision competition he's got matched up against him, I think there's some great opportunity to be had with the Jets, and I think that overall Josh Allen's going to make it a point of emphasis to get Diggs the football, so I don't really have too many concerns with Stefon Diggs. At the fourth spot in that tier 2, right at the top of this tier here, I've got DeAndre Hopkins, who finished as wide receiver 5 last season. When you look at DeAndre Hopkins' game, there's really nothing you can knock about him. He is one of the more polished and complete wide receivers the NFL has right now. He's got really great size. He's got nice speed. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he is definitely no slow wideout. He can move. He also has the ability to win contested catches. Obviously, we saw him catch that Hail Mary against the Bills last season in like quadruple coverage. So DeAndre Hopkins is an amazing talent at the wide receiver position. I love his quarterback matchup here with Kyler Murray. Those two work really great together, and we saw them hit it off instantly last season. I think in year 2 in the same offense together, maybe DeAndre Hopkins even takes a step forward from what he did last season. Obviously, he's always been a great target, even in his time in Houston with some awful quarterback play. So Hopkins, he's a guy that I have really little concerns with. I would say if I had even one thing that I had to put against DeAndre Hopkins, it would be the fact that he plays Jalen Ramsey twice a year. And to be honest, that's the only thing that held him down from being ahead of Stefon Diggs for me on this list. I think very highly of DeAndre Hopkins, and I think that he is a very safe wideout that if you can snatch at the end of the first round or top of the second, depending on how ADP falls and how your league mates value him, he is a very safe option to go with early in your drafts. Next up in this second tier here, I've got A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was phenomenal last season, and reports actually came out after the year finished that A.J. Brown was supposed to have season-ending surgery after the Broncos game on his knees because of the damage he did to them. A.J. Brown played the whole season. He missed a couple games. He only played 14 games last season, but he toughed through it all year long, and he dominated corners. He is in a great division for fantasy production. The AFC South has absolutely atrocious defenses. He gets the Jags twice a year. He gets the Texans twice a year. And the Colts, they're a solid defense, but he was able to produce against them once out of his 2 tries last year. I actually made quite the hot take to sit him against the game, or against the Colts the game. He only had 1 catch, so that looked pretty good for me. But the other game he was able to do quite well. A.J. Brown's one of my favorite players in the league. He is a guy who wins at the point of catch. He is amazing after the catch, which is even more important. When this guy has the football in his hands, he is physically punishing and imposes his will on opposing DBs, and it's really hard for them to get him on the ground. So A.J. Brown, he is a really, really good football player. This guy is going to produce for fantasy teams. Like I said, that division is so advantageous. And when you look at the Titans offense, Ryan Tannehill is an underrated quarterback, and that running game with Derrick Henry sets up great play action opportunities over the top, which really complements A.J. Brown's game and ability to win those contested and big play opportunities. So A.J. Brown here, I love this guy. I think he is a steal in draft day because of how deep the wide receiver position is. We see them kind of get knocked on the board. I think A.J. Brown could be a very nice I have no idea where he's going to end up going, but I would assume that he'd be somewhere between the mid to late second and early third round of your draft board. And then up next here, we've got his former college teammate DK Metcalf out of Ole Miss. Metcalf for the Seahawks, as of right now, has great quarterback play next to him, obviously with Russell Wilson, but that's a whole nother conversation and issue that we might have to deal with at a later time if Russ is to end up getting shipped out of town. So DK for now, though. We love DK Metcalf. This guy's game is crazy fun to watch. The one knock I kind of have for him and A.J. Brown, collectively, I didn't bring this up with A.J. Brown, but these guys are not volume players. These guys get their work done on 4, 5, 6 catches. They don't typically have that many games where they're in the double-digit reception column, and that can be a little bit more risky. That can make these guys more touchdown dependent, and if they're lacking a big play in a football game, that can ultimately bring their ceiling and honestly their floor down as well. So one of the big things I'm talking about this offseason, and I have planned for you guys, the draft guide, is mainly centered around consistency. Guys who go out there and don't wreck your fantasy week, but also have very, very great ceilings and the opportunity to exceed their expectations. That's how you ultimately end up winning fantasy games and hanging on in those games where both teams don't do so hot because your team has the safer floor. So that's another whole conversation to get into here. But DK Metcalf is a guy who carries a bit more risk. Same with A.J. Brown if they aren't able to find those big plays and those touchdowns. But we do love having Russell Wilson as the quarterback. He was actually out-targeted by a hair by Tyler Lockett last season. But I think the more and more we see out of these guys, year 3 for A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf, I think they'll really have a huge pop this year. Obviously, they're no secret at this point. Everybody knows their names. They're household names and very, very productive fantasy players. But I would expect even more from them out of year 3 here than we've seen in the past. Up next here, I think is the most disrespected wide receiver, not only in fantasy football, but in the entire NFL. Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers is honestly one of the best wideouts in the game. And I know that's a hard thing to say. There's a lot of really great wide receivers, but the things that Keenan Allen does for that football team go highly unnoticed, and this guy is straight up a stud and a player who you can count on in your fantasy lineups week in and week out. He got in some beef last year with Mike Evans when they were kind of having a little skirmish about who's better. I'd take Keenan Allen every single day of the week and twice on Sundays. Keenan Allen does so much for his quarterback. He does so many things well, and when you look at what he means to his team is so much more than what Mike Evans means to that Tampa Bay offense. There's so many guys in Tampa Bay that Tom Brady can throw the football to. You know, he's going to look for the open guy. He's not going to force the ball to players. But Keenan Allen, he led the NFL in targets prior to getting injured at the back end of the season. Keenan Allen's a guy who he really does a great job, and he did a great job this past season protecting Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert, we've seen the crazy talent this guy has, but for a rookie quarterback, having a player like Keenan Allen is invaluable. His routes are so good. He might be a top 3 or 4 route runner in the league. Prior to seeing Justin Jefferson last season, I might have even said he was top 2. But obviously, we've got so many great receivers in the game. Like I said, that's really hard to narrow that list down. Keenan Allen, though, the disrespect has gone too far. This guy could finish as a top 5 wideout next season. I've got him down here just outside of that at number 7 for now, but I think there is a great chance he jumps into that category. If you had to knock Keenan Allen, the one thing I would say, maybe even 2 things here, his touchdown ceiling is a bit limited. He's not a great red zone player. Unlike Devante Adams, he doesn't have that 6-foot+ stature that we see out of him and that ability to leap up in the air and grab footballs out of the DB's hands that we've seen Devante Adams do, and that's really resulted in that huge 58 touchdowns he's put up over the last 4 seasons. Keenan Allen doesn't do that so much. He's going to win in the end zone with his routes, but he's not necessarily a jump ball player or a guy who is going to win those big contested grabs. So, and then the last thing is that Keenan Allen he's kind of good to miss a few games a year. Unfortunately, 2 of the last 3 seasons, he's chosen to get hurt during the fantasy playoffs. Very unopportune there, but Keenan Allen's a guy who I think is a baller and I think is going to come out and do great things, especially with Herbert in year 2 this season. Then here we've got Calvin Ridley starting off that next tier of wide receivers here. This is my 3rd tier of wideouts. I know Calvin Ridley, probably a lot of Falcons fans are thinking this is some disrespect towards Calvin Ridley. Finished as the wide receiver 4 in 2020 and had a great and a really awesome productive season for the Atlanta Falcons. But Ridley, let's face it, he's still got Julio Jones in Atlanta for the time being. I'll give it to him. He did have 5% more of a target share than Julio Jones did last season. and he was a really great player. Calvin Ridley thoroughly impressed me against some solid corners too. He was able to put in quite a bit of work. He was shut out by my Packers, Jair Alexander, but nonetheless, I watched some tape from that game. He still was able to win at times. Matt Ryan was just under too much pressure and wasn't able to give him the ball. So Calvin Ridley, I think this guy has a great future in Atlanta. Certainly, I think if the Falcons, all reports indicate towards Julio being back in 2021, but if they were to move off of Julio somehow, absolutely Calvin really shoots up this board. He is a really talented player, obviously picked in the first round, and I think he could be, once again, a top 10 receiver if he stays healthy all season like he did last year. It's just a matter of there's another really dominant receiver on that football team, and I think that can really start to eat into a lot of Calvin Ridley's production if Julio is able to stay healthier for longer this coming season and play more football games. So Calvin Ridley, he's a wide receiver 1 coming into 2021. He just doesn't quite have the pedigree or the volume per se in the world that Julio Jones is a 100% factor throughout the course of the season. At the next spot here in that third tier, I've got Allen Robinson, the free agent right now. Obviously, we've got him up there in Bears uniform with that Bears logo in the background. Finished as wide receiver 11 last season. I think Allen Robinson, just like Keenan Allen, is one of the most disrespected wide receivers in the game right now. Robinson has produced with maybe the worst quarterback play in the league throughout the course of his career and somehow maintained that level as a fantasy and NFL star. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins has had worse, but he at least has had Kyler Murray for a year and Deshaun Watson for 2 or 3. So Allen Robinson, though, he's played with Blake Bortles, Mitchell Trubisky, and Nick Foles. This guy has suffered through the absolute bottom of the barrel, and he has still produced really, really good numbers. He had a 1,500-yard season in his time with the Jags, and then this past year finished as wide receiver 11 for Chicago. I don't think Allen Robinson will be back with the Bears. I think that I would root for Bears fans here to get Robinson back under contract and to have him play for Chicago next season. I just don't know how likely that is to happen. I think that's a long shot at this point. Allen Robinson is such a beast, though. This guy only had 6 touchdowns last season, but he had 151 targets. That's more than Devante Adams had last year. He is one of the most valuable parts to that Bears offense. It would be a crime to not at least attempt to re-sign him, which reports have said they haven't attempted to so far, and they haven't been able to get a deal done to this point, obviously. So Allen Robinson, regardless of where this guy goes, I can only see all signs pointing up for Allen Robinson. I can't imagine he'd choose to sign with a team with quarterback play lower than the level he's had so far in his career. I think the only thing that could really take a hit on him is if he signs with a team that would make him the wide receiver 2, which is a thin list of names that I think would actually out-talent and out-produce Robinson. So Allen here, I think another guy who could rise up this list very soon. I love Allen Robinson's game, and I would love to see him go somewhere where he can have a dominant quarterback, really help him take that next step forward and into being a household name, because it's just sad what we've seen him have to go through so far in his career. Next up, one of my favorite value picks, I think, coming up for this season, Justin Jefferson is looking like he's going to go in the 3rd round of fantasy drafts this season. If I can get Justin Jefferson in the 3rd round of a draft, that's an absolute steal. Finished as wide receiver 7 as a rookie. This guy might be one of the most impressive wideouts in the game. His routes are on another level when you look at how young he is and how quickly he ended up producing this season. Justin Jefferson is crazy. He had a 26% target share, like I said, as a rookie with Adam Thielen on his team. Adam Thielen finished as a fairly relevant fantasy receiver, but he just hauled in a crap load of touchdowns. Adam Thielen had 14 touchdowns. You look at Justin Jefferson, he only had 7. 1,400 yards, though, like I said. He had more yards after the catch than Tyreek Hill did with 445. That number is astronomical when you look at some of the things he's done versus man coverage. He won over 75% of his routes in man-to-man. So Jefferson is a special, special talent. This guy, the only thing holding him back right now is that Adam Thielen, like I said, is on that roster, so he can't be an absolute outright alpha wide receiver 1, although he clearly has that type of potential and talent. And then the other thing is the Vikings are just a run-first offense. These guys want to pound the ball with Dalvin Cook. He had I believe Dalvin Cook was 2nd in touches per game by running backs this season. So obviously there's a lot of touches being put elsewhere into that offense. Justin Jefferson just has slightly limited volume, but he still, like I said, over a quarter of the target share for his entire offense. That is really, really good. The sky's the limit for Justin Jefferson. I think in 2021, he could finish even higher than wide receiver 7. Like I said, I love all these guys in this list pretty much, except for this bottom tier here. There's some serious question marks about. Other than that, the top 10 guys in this list, they all have so much potential, and if these guys stay healthy, they are in for massive seasons. It just kind of shows and illustrates for you guys how deep that wide receiver position is, and especially this top class of guys here. Obviously, I've broken them down to tiers, but it shows you how you can still get really, really elite wide receiver talent in the second and even third rounds of your fantasy drafts next season. So into this fourth and final tier, this one's sad. Julio Jones, still a wide receiver 1, but just the fact that he is in that fourth tier of wide receiver 1s, it's kind of shocking, watching Julio grow up as a kid, or watching him as I grew up, I should say. Julio was dominant. He was that 1A wide receiver that was just, it seemed like he was miles ahead of everyone else in the game at the time. Julio, he's a big physical player, and time doesn't do wide receivers well, or any position in football, obviously, unless your name is Tom Brady. And Julio's getting banged up. He's still Julio Jones. This guy has so much talent. He still can fly down the football field, and he's basically a freight train playing wide receiver. He is the first, not the first, I guess. Megatron came before Julio, but he was the DK Metcalf before the DK Metcalf, the hyped up wide receiver, and now Julio, he's getting dinged up. He's playing less and less every season. It seems like he's always carrying a laundry list of injuries into each week. Only played 9 games last season, 20% target share. Like I said, Calvin Ridley had 25%, so that just shows even how much attention he's getting from opposing teams, and how much Calvin Ridley honestly has stepped up in that offense. I'm not saying that Calvin Ridley has overtaken Julio Jones as the wide receiver 1 in that Atlanta offense, but clearly Julio Jones is still the number 1 priority for opposing defenses, because they are not going to let him run free on the field. And second of all, Calvin Ridley has emerged. Let's face it, he has broken out and is a star in today's game. So Julio, I still think, has the potential to be a wide receiver 1, but it's just really a question of, is he going to be able to suit up for the amount of games that would be worth you investing your draft capital in those redraft leagues for? And at the end of the day, is he going to put up the amount of touchdowns even that you hope that he could? Obviously, Julio Jones has a great frame. He's highly athletic. But when the Falcons get down in the red zone, he always has safety help on him. I mean, teams are not going to let Julio freaking Jones get open in the red zone. They are just going to take him away and force Matt Ryan to go elsewhere. And that's honestly, we've seen the Falcons recently struggle in their red zone offense. The running attack is not very good down there. Todd Gurley was really only relevant in fantasy last season from scoring goal line touchdowns. And then they take away Julio regardless. They don't let him, like I said, get open. They want to put safety help on him, and they're going to make him throw elsewhere. Matt Ryan gets pressured because he's a sack dummy right now. Long Falcons tangent here, but the end of the story is Julio Jones is not putting up the same numbers that he was earlier on in his career. He's getting older. He's getting up there in age, and we should expect less from him in fantasy in 2021. And finally here, I've got Michael Thomas. MT, there's just a lot of moving pieces with the Saints right now, a lot of question marks regarding Michael Thomas and what he still is as a player. Obviously, Michael Thomas is not like washed up trash anymore, but we obviously did not see anything close to what we saw from Michael Thomas in 2019 this past season, and a lot of that can be attributed to injuries. Michael Thomas just couldn't stay on the field. He had some scuffles and run-ins at practice that was actually granted him a team suspension for a game, but MT just has to show us again that he is the same player that we still think he is. And by all means, I think that Michael Thomas has a crazy high ceiling. Obviously, a guy who set the NFL receptions record in a single season just 2 years ago is clearly a very talented player and a guy who can get the job done. But there's so many risks and red flags surrounding him this season that it's kind of hard for me to be willing to invest my draft pick into Michael Thomas or rate him higher on this board. We have no clue who's going to be the quarterback for the Saints next season. I mean, just when I thought it was down to Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, then all these, Fox Sports, ESPN, they're all talking about Drew Brees' workout video, questioning whether or not he's going to come back next season. I don't think that's the case. I think that's just a bunch of smoke and mirrors from Drew Brees. But, there's so many situations this could play out where it's not advantageous to Michael Thomas. We saw him put up decent numbers this past season with Taysom Hill, but it was nothing like what it was in 2019. He had no touchdowns this past season, and even when he was quote-unquote healthy and suited up for games, he was not anywhere near the dominant player he was for Drew Brees' offense in that 2019 season. So MT, I still think he's got a lot left in the tank. I still think he's a highly talented player. But at the end of the day, quarterback play matters for wide receivers in fantasy football. Can he stay healthy? Can he get back to that 2019 dominance? Lots of things need to be answered for Michael Thomas this season. And so he falls a lot down my board this year, and I think for decent reason. That was my early top 12 rankings for the wide receiver position for 2021 fantasy football. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to head down, like this video, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Also, if you guys are looking for any exclusive content, head over to my Patreon at the bottom of the screen. You guys can get hooked up with some exclusive articles, videos, and other analysis in the fantasy world. Also, if you guys want to check out and do your own scouting for the 2021 NFL draft class, I've got some videos uploaded there as well with some all-22 intercut film for some of the prospects coming in this past year, and I'll continue to upload those for you guys as well. So, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.